It's rare to meet someone who's never danced. Dance is a universal language which crosses cultural and socio-economic divides. In early childhood education, one of the main aims is to help children to make meaning of the world around them. And movement is a way of knowing. Young children know up and down before they know the word for it. There's extensive research linking dance education to children's cognitive development and their social and emotional well-being. You might think that dance is only learning steps as you would do in a ballet class, but there's a long tradition of dance that's not teacher-led. Leading experts in the area of dance education in early childhood focus on child-led creative movement and how children can learn through dance rather than learn to dance. Free dance can also be seen as a form of play and therefore fits within the emergent play-based curriculum dictated by the Early Years Learning Framework, which is followed by all early childhood educators in Australia. Dance is outlined as a specific outcome in the EYLF, but it can also be used as a tool to satisfy all outcomes. Plus, dance is fun. Yet, despite the evidence of the benefits associated with dance education, Pendergast and Garbus's research tells us that dance is the least utilised creative art in the early childhood classroom, and that educators have low self-efficacy beliefs in their capabilities in dance education compared to English and maths. It's also been found that generalist teachers are generally positive about having dance in the classroom, yet they don't teach it. So dance education is like Brussels sprouts. We know they're good for us, but we still feed them to the dog. The question is, why? Before I go on, I'd like to tell you my story. Storytelling's an important theme across this proposal, and I'd like to tell you how my relationship with the arts led me to this research. I love the performing arts. I recently changed career to become an early childhood educator, and the main aim was to bring as much music and dance to as many children as I possibly could. I also teach specialist music and movement at kindergartens and childcare centres around Melbourne. But in my travels, I've discovered that most of my colleagues don't share my enthusiasm for the performing arts. I hear, don't do dance. I'm not talented enough. And they normally sit on the edges of the circle and roll their eyes or look at me later on and say, aren't you embarrassed to dance like that with the children? At first this spurred me on, and I went on some sort of evangelical mission of conversion of the non-believers. And then something happened one day that changed my mind, but also was a catalyst for me coming to this proposed research. I was teaching music and movement to a group of toddlers at a childcare centre, and the majority of educators were Punjabi. And I used to sing a welcome song that went, Lynda's here to sing this song, doo-dah, doo-dah. And one day one of the educators came up to me and said, Lynda, what does doo-dah, doo-dah mean? And I explained to her that it was from an old English song called Camp Down Ladies. And she looked at me confused, and then she wrote down the name of the song and promised to Google it. I went home that night and I thought to myself, the teachers aren't sitting around on the periphery because they've got a negative attitude to music or dance. It's because they didn't understand the songs that I was playing. So I downloaded a Punjabi song from iTunes, and the next week I played it for the children and I told them to dance freely. All of a sudden, all of the educators were up and dancing with big smiles on their faces. And they said to each other, oh, that's what we used to do when we were little, as they swung each other around in circles. They grabbed the children and they taught them Indian dance steps, and the children made up their own steps. And everybody was really happy. The story of the Punjabi educators showed me that it wasn't my job to judge my colleagues and assume that they all had a negative attitude to dance. It inspired me to dig deeper. And so the aim of this research is to discover the reasons for the blockage, discover the reasons for the unease with dance in early childhood education. Ultimately, I'd like to inspire a reflection on praxis to bring the benefits of dance education to more children. It's my hope that through my research and my chosen methodology that I might create a liberating energy in the participants so that one day they might seek to uncover their own creative capabilities and introduce more dance into their classrooms. I guess I want to do myself out of a job. Educational policy in Australia has been focused on improving the quality of early childhood education and care for some time now. Hattie tells us that the quality of the teacher is more influential than any other factor on children's learning outcomes. And the Melbourne Declaration, as well as the EYLF, imply that the arts should be given the same priority as literacy and numeracy. We know that the educational benefits of dance are far-reaching, especially for young children. So it's really important to find out why early childhood educators are not including a subject area that could bring so much benefit to children. Also, apart from the work of Pendergast and Garvis, there's little research in Australia and internationally that gives in-depth accounts of educators' conceptions of dance education specific to early childhood settings. There's also no research in Australia or internationally, of which I'm aware, about non-tertiary educated educators of children under 4, who would arguably gain the most benefit from dance education. Existing research calls for more descriptive investigation into the reasons educators don't dance, and I seek to fill this gap. I noticed in my readings that the existing research didn't define dance education, and this led me to connect with a variety of experts who advocated creative dance, which is child-led and collaborative. These included Stinson and Orick from the US, Sansom and Antilla from New Zealand, and Schiller and Miners from Australia. Their views reflected my own epistemological beliefs that knowledge is co-constructed, and I go into the influence of Sansom's work on my research in the theoretical framework. I also looked at the notion of a playful approach to dance education as advocated by Nyland and Gelongo, and I began to wonder if dance was defined as creative movement, whether educators' view of it might be different. Pendergast and Garvis's research, although technically related to early childhood, only looked at the conceptions of tertiary educated teachers from kindergarten upwards, which leaves out a huge proportion of the workforce in early childhood settings in Australia, who arguably have a great influence on the quality of programs delivered to young children under 4. Their research was also quantitative and conducted via survey, so I got a really limited insight into the meanings behind the responses given by the participants. But the statistics in this research provided me with an excellent starting point to delve deeper. In the absence of research specific to early childhood settings, I looked to Australian research at primary levels, and Russell Bowie's study of teachers' conceptions across 5 different countries provided me with the direction I needed. She found that teachers' backgrounds and their exposure to community dance rituals in the different countries had an effect on whether or not teachers included dance in their programs. What was interesting about this research is that there was a huge difference between the Western teachers and those from African countries, where the Western teachers were less likely to include dance in their programs. But Russell Bowie's research was also quantitative, and I wanted to go even deeper, as meaning making is so important to me. So I looked at the research in the US and Canada, which had employed qualitative research methods such as in-depth interviews. Studies conducted in New Zealand by Sansom utilised narrative inquiry and the study of teachers' reflections and learning stories. It was this international literature that inspired my choice of methodology and helped me to fine-tune my research question. I can summarise the research findings in the literature I connected with in this illustration of the anatomy of a carrot. The diagram shows the different reasons that I've found for non-inclusion of dance education in the literature. But what about the root causes? My readings on methodology by Titchen and Hobson and Butler-Kisber introduced me to the concept of the precognitive background of teachers' experiences, the stuff they don't even know is affecting them. I also know from my own experiences as a teacher that context and the culture of an environment can also affect people's perceptions. This led me to further exploration of a suitable methodological framework that would get to the root causes. Though Edwards puts it more eloquently than I could ever, we need to find out the subjective experiences, beliefs and values of the teacher in order to see where the barrier is to operationalising the theory. In my own classroom, I embrace socio-constructivist ideals and I'm passionate about the Reggio Emilia approach to early childhood education. Socio-constructivism sees children as active participants in their own learning and gives a lot of value to the cultural backgrounds of children and also asks us to acknowledge their prior knowledge. Reggio Emilia approach sees the child as beautiful and capable and creative and values learning through social interaction and questioning. So socio-constructivism and the Reggio Emilia approach have a lot in common, and both these views are common themes across the literature on dance education. My research was inspired greatly by the work of Adrienne Sansom from New Zealand. She sees dance as a tool for empowerment with the capacity for transformation not only for children but also for teachers. I learnt about the power of free dance from Sansom, not only the power in engendering identity and belonging in children, but also in helping teachers to uncover their own creative capabilities. She sees teachers and children as co-choreographers of the dance and also of learning. Her view matched my own, but she also highlighted that the possibilities of dance education are limited only by the adults themselves, and this opened up in me a genuine curiosity to discover what those limitations are. I also decided that my actual research methodology should also reflect my epistemological beliefs. In the same way as dance can be viewed as a way of honouring children and their backgrounds, I wanted my research to be a dance between myself and my participants, a way of building trust and breaking down barriers. Sansom conducted a narrative inquiry into teachers' perspectives about dance through the theoretical lens of curere, which when applied to education refers to the concept of a living curriculum created by participants, but in research it can also be viewed as a process of regressive and progressive recollection and retrospective reflection whose purpose is to look into the past but bring that past into the present in order to look forward to the future and effect change. The following quote from Sansom sums up perfectly what I want to achieve through this proposed research. When addressing who we are as teachers from a historical perspective, there is the possibility to interrogate the socio-cultural and political contexts that inform what we do, especially those areas that are seen as marginal components of the curriculum or have been limited in our own lives. Dance can be viewed as one of those areas. In Reggio Emilia, teachers provoke occasions of discovery by introducing specific concepts and providing guidance through effectively directed questions. This idea of provocation and collaboration has greatly influenced me. I seek to be a co-inquirer with my participants, and I want to acknowledge their backgrounds and give meaning to the impact this background has on their teaching. I want to guide the participants through questioning and collaborative reflection on their stories, just like Sansom did through the theoretical lens of curere. I also want to use the Reggio Emilia notion of provocation to perhaps discover hidden prejudices about dance education influenced by the teacher's perspectives. I've chosen a qualitative approach for my research so I can focus in an in-depth way on a smaller population. Within qualitative inquiry, I've chosen to undertake phenomenological inquiry, which focuses on the participants' lived experiences of a phenomenon within everyday social contexts. The lack of dance education in early childhood settings is a phenomenon worth investigating, as it has the potential to directly affect the quality of education provided to young children. Phenomenological inquiry is usually conducted via in-depth interviews and seeks to reveal common features of shared understandings across experiences, which go to explaining the phenomenon. I'm attracted to phenomenology because as someone who purposefully includes dance in my daily practice, I needed to acknowledge my presuppositions about the phenomenon. This is called bracketing. However, in traditional phenomenology, the researcher refrains from evaluating the experiences of participants, and being a detached observer does not sit well with me or my epistemological beliefs. So I look to hermeneutic phenomenology, pioneered by Van Manen and Heidegger, which is concerned with interpreting concealed meanings in phenomena. The researcher actively takes a role in explaining participants' meanings. But even then, I was not completely satisfied with my choice. I want to engage in meaningful inquiry to co-construct knowledge with the participants. I then discovered a method that would marry hermeneutic phenomenology with socio-constructivism, the Socratic hermeneutic interview. The Socratic hermeneutic interview is an interview method developed by Dinkins, where the interviewer and interviewee are co-inquirers who question each other and reflect on the concepts emerging within the interview itself. This method would allow me to acknowledge my own assumptions, but also allow them to affect the dialogue. Dinkin believes that phenomena is more than a sum of the specific experiences or incidents. Phenomenological interviewing focuses on the details of participants' experience, but the Socratic hermeneutic interview insists that the co-inquirer says what she or he believes. The parties then reflect together, assisting each other to purge their false beliefs and uncover the essence of the phenomenon. Ralston has also lauded this method. I've chosen Seidman's three phenomenological interview structure, but I've modified it to include the Socratic hermeneutic interview. The first interview will put the participants' experience of the phenomenon in context, as they tell me as much as possible about themselves and their experiences of dance education. The second interview will focus on the details of the experiences and the participants' relationships with others in the environment. The third interview will be the Socratic hermeneutic interview, where the participants and I reflect together on the meaning of their experiences. I'll use open questions to engage the participants in dialogue. I've chosen to recruit only 6 to 8 participants from a variety of backgrounds and holding varying qualifications. I'll recruit the participants from childcare centres known to me by first seeking open expressions of interest and then seeking referrals to participants from colleagues. This would lead to a greater sense of trust between myself and the participants, as I will not be a complete stranger even though they don't know me personally, and I think this is really important when you're doing something as confronting as the Socratic hermeneutic interview. Seidman's interview structure and Dinkin's methodology highlight the importance of the participant's story, as storytelling provides access to lived experience. My interviews will also be shaped around the narrative in an attempt to gain insight into the phenomenon through description of teachers' experience. I'm going to employ narrative analysis rather than content analysis, which is commonly associated with phenomenological inquiry, as the coding that is usually done risks paying lip service to the perspectives of the educators. Narrative analysis acknowledges that multiple versions of experience are the norm. I want to employ the narrative structural analysis of Lebov and Woletsky to tease out a shortened version of each participant's narrative. The shortened narrative will be written in the third person to illustrate my presence in it. Once the narrative is analysed, I will then examine the synthesised narratives to elicit common and more conceptual themes across the narratives, which will bring me back to more traditional phenomenological inquiry. This is my timeline, and it will be greatly influenced by whether or not I get ethical approval for this project. The ethical considerations in an interview inquiry are many, because you're dealing with people's lives and their feelings. However, I'd like to concentrate on 2 in this presentation. I need to obtain the participants' informed consent and give them a plain language statement outlining everything about the research process. I think it'll be really important to explain to them the exact nature of the Socratic hermeneutic interview, because many participants might find that confronting, and I need to engender trust from the outset. The other thing I need to be aware of is giving the participants too much information. Because I'm focusing on the narrative in the interviews, I need their responses to be as spontaneous as possible. The other thing I need to be aware of is my role as researcher. I don't want to allow my own prejudices and views of dance education to influence the answers of my participants. Sophie could be in it too, yeah. Just fine. Oh, you want to hold hands with James? Okay. Wait a time. You hold hands together. Oh, Melinda wants